My name is Emily, and for 12 years, I believed marriage meant standing beside each other through every season. When my husband Ryan lost his job, I never questioned whether I would stay. I questioned how we would make it work. He had spent nearly 15 years at the same technology company outside Denver. One Friday afternoon, he walked through the front door carrying a cardboard box with his coffee mug, a framed photo of us, and the silence of someone who had just lost a piece of himself. "They eliminated my position," he whispered. I wrapped my arms around him before he could finish explaining. "We'll figure it out," I said. And we did. I picked up extra shifts as a project coordinator. I canceled vacations. I stopped buying clothes unless they were absolutely necessary. I sold jewelry that had been sitting in my drawer for years because I knew it mattered more that our mortgage stayed current than that I kept a necklace I rarely wore. I never reminded him of what I was sacrificing, because that's what I thought love looked like. Ryan struggled during those months. He wasn't lazy. He sent applications every morning and attended interviews whenever he could. But every rejection chipped away at his confidence. Some evenings, he apologized for not being enough. I always answered the same way. "You are more than your paycheck." I meant every word. 9 months later, he finally accepted an offer with another company. The salary wasn't quite what he'd earned before, but it gave us stability again. That night, we ordered takeout and celebrated in our tiny kitchen. "I'll never forget what you did for me," he said, squeezing my hand. I believed him. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least I thought it had. 2 years later, my company announced a major restructuring. Everyone gathered in the conference room with nervous smiles that disappeared as the meeting continued. By lunchtime, I no longer had a job. Driving home felt strangely familiar. Only this time, I was carrying the cardboard box. I kept telling myself Ryan would understand because we'd already survived this once. He opened the front door before I reached for my keys. "You're home early." I forced a smile. I got laid off. His face changed, not with sadness, but with worry. "We'll be okay," I said quickly. "Remember when you lost your job? We got through that." He nodded. "Yeah, that was all. No hug, no reassurance. I told myself everyone reacts differently." The next morning, I updated my URSUM before breakfast. By the afternoon, I had already submitted 8 applications. Ryan noticed. "Good," he said. "You need to stay productive." His words stung more than I expected. During his unemployment, I had never counted applications or measured his progress. I had simply believed in him. Weeks passed. I attended networking events, completed online certifications, reached out to former coworkers. Every evening, Ryan asked the same question. "Any interviews?" If I answered no, the conversation ended. If I answered yes, he immediately asked what the salary would be. It felt less like encouragement and more like an evaluation. One Saturday morning, I found him reviewing our monthly budget. "We need to cut back," he said. "I know. You should probably stop buying coffee." I looked at the receipt in my purse. It was one $6 coffee I'd bought after an interview. I remembered the months I'd quietly packed his favorite lunches while he searched for work. I remembered driving across town to encourage him before difficult interviews. I never once criticized a small purchase that made him feel human. Still, I stayed calm. I understand. A month later, I landed a second-round interview for a position I really wanted. I spent hours preparing. When I walked into the living room wearing my navy blazer, Ryan barely looked up from his laptop. "Good luck." "Thanks, that was it." No hug, no smile, no "you've got this." The interview went well, but another candidate was chosen. I cried quietly in my car before driving home. Ryan listened to my explanation for less than a minute. "You can't let rejection get to you." I stared at him. Wasn't this the same man who had once questioned his own worth after every rejection? Hadn't I spent countless evenings reminding him he wasn't failing? That night, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I replayed the last 3 months in my mind. Something had shifted. Not in our finances, in our partnership. A few days later, Ryan came home excited. My company wants me to lead a new project. That's wonderful. They're talking about a promotion. I smiled because I genuinely wanted him to succeed. But I couldn't ignore the quiet thought that followed. When his career grew, our marriage celebrated. When mine struggled, it became my personal problem. The realization settled heavily in my chest. Then, one evening, while I was folding laundry, Ryan walked into the room. "I've been thinking." I looked up. "If you don't find something soon," he said casually, "maybe it makes more sense for you to stop working altogether. You could stay home, handle everything here, and support my career instead." He smiled as if he'd offered me a gift, and in that single moment, I realized the woman who had carried us through his hardest season had become invisible in her own. I folded the last towel, looked him in the eyes, and quietly answered, "Tomorrow, we need to have a different conversation." Ryan looked confused. A different conversation about what? I folded the towel one last time before placing it neatly into the basket. About what partnership actually means. He laughed softly. I was only trying to be practical, I know. My voice stayed calm. But practicality shouldn't only apply to one person. He frowned. "What does that mean?" I took a deep breath. "When you lost your job, I never suggested you give up your career." He stayed silent. "I never measured your worth by your paycheck. Still nothing. I never treated your unemployment like an inconvenience to my life." His eyes dropped toward the floor. For the first time in months, I wasn't speaking from hurt. I was speaking from clarity. I supported you because I believed we were building a life together. The room became incredibly quiet, and now, I continued, I'm asking myself whether we've both been building that same life. Ryan sat down slowly. "I didn't realize. I don't think you did." He rubbed his forehead. "I thought pushing you would motivate you." It didn't feel like motivation. It felt like judgment. Those words hung in the air. He didn't argue with them. Instead, he whispered something I hadn't expected. "I've been terrified." I waited. When I finally got my career back, I became afraid we'd lose everything again. I nodded. I understand fear. I lived with it for 9 months. But fear isn't an excuse to stop being kind. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I never thanked you enough." "No, you didn't. But that's not what hurts. What hurts is that you forgot how I treated you when you needed someone most." He covered his face with his hands. "I'm sorry." It wasn't a dramatic apology. It wasn't perfect. It was honest. Over the next several weeks, something slowly changed. Ryan stopped asking only about salaries. Instead, he asked how interviews made me feel. He practiced questions with me before meetings. He celebrated every callback, even when it didn't become an offer. One afternoon, he surprised me by placing my favorite coffee on the kitchen counter. I figured $6 isn't going to ruin our future. We both laughed. For the first time in months, it felt genuine. 3 weeks later, I received another interview. This one was with a nonprofit focused on community development. The salary was slightly lower than my previous position, but the work excited me. When I told Ryan, he smiled. "What do you want?" "Not what pays more. Not what looks better." "What do you want?" "I want to do work that matters. Then I hope they hire you." 2 days later, they did. As I signed the offer letter, I realized something important. Getting my job back wasn't my greatest victory. Finding my voice was. That evening, Ryan cooked dinner. Halfway through the meal, he reached across the table. "I've learned something." I smiled. "What's that?" "Supporting someone isn't measured during the easy years. It's measured during the seasons when they forget how strong they are. I squeezed his hand. And respect has to travel both directions. Marriage didn't become perfect after that. No marriage does, but our partnership became more honest. We stopped keeping invisible scorecards. We started asking better questions, and I stopped believing that love meant carrying everything in silence. Because real love doesn't ask one person to shrink so the other can grow. It grows together. And if it ever forgets how, a quiet conversation can change everything. If this story touched you, please comment and subscribe. I have one question for you. Have you ever felt that your support in a relationship wasn't returned when you needed it most? Let me know your answer below.